Now, over the last few years, we've covered some of the most difficult issues facing transgender children, teenagers and adults. Today, we're going to talk to a man who has detransitioned. Richard Hoskins, who's an author and criminologist, identified for 4 years as Rachel, undergoing hormone treatment on the NHS and multiple operations abroad, which he paid for privately. He was about to complete one of the final physical changes a trans woman can choose to undergo, a vagina construction, when he changed his mind. After having therapy, he was diagnosed with complex PTSD, which was linked to abuse he'd suffered as a child and the deaths of 3 of his children. He now says more should have been done to support his mental health before rushing him, his words, towards gender reassignment. And Richard's here for his first broadcast interview. Good morning. Thank you for talking to us and to our audience. Explain to our audience why you believe you began identifying as a woman.
I, at the time, was really convinced, and I guess convincing to people that I really was in the wrong body, trapped in the wrong body. This is one of the sort of favourite phrases that's used, and I convinced myself of that I was in the wrong gender, that I should have been born female, and that the only way to be happy was to go through the process and actually become Rachel, as I called myself. So I genuinely believed it.
And your family around you, friends?
Found it hard, very hard. Children particularly, I think, struggle with this. That is children of people transitioning. My mother obviously struggled with it a bit, but I had also a huge amount of support from people. So I think in this culture, people are sort of encouraged to be as affirming as possible of people who transition or feel that they need to transition.
And this was in 2014, 6 years ago. You were 49 then.
Yeah.
And you bought some hormones illegally online, didn't you?
I did.
What effect did they have on you?
Massive physical changes and emotional changes. They're powerful things. Hormones are really, really strong. And there's 2 sort of strands to what you take. One is to block, in my case, testosterone, so block what's known as the androgen receptors. And the other is actually the opposite, is to positively take estrogen. So I did both, and I bought them off. I sourced the internet, I went onto forums, found out where you can get hold of these things, and I took, illegally as you say, some pretty powerful anti-androgens, some pretty powerful testosterone blockers, as well as taking estrogen. And they left me not only with big physical changes, some which are irreversible, but...
i.e. breasts, for example.
Breast
you
growth.
went up to, what, 36, 38C?
Yeah, 38C. The only way now that I could change that is to have surgery. So big changes and big hormone swings as well, emotional swings. I changed hugely. There's some things you can't change. As a man transitioning, you can't remove your stubble that way. I had 80 hours worth of electrolysis to do that. But my face did change, and I looked very different. I became, at times, moderately convincing as a femle.
And all this was on the NHS. It was some 80 hours of electrolysis, for example, on the NHS.
And voice training on the NHS, yeah.
So you bought the hormones illegally online. Then you went to your GP.
Yeah, because I was feeling unwell. Yeah.
And that's when you were on the path in the NHS.
I was, and I was pretty much hurtled through. Really, I went to the GP who felt sorry for me. So fair play to her. She referred me to the GIC, Gender Identity Clinic, and normally that takes best part of a year of the waiting list. I mean, there'll be people watching the show, I'm sure, who are desperately wanting to transition. Who
waited much longer than that.
Yeah. I saw my first consultant in 2 weeks, which is incredible, really. And
very unusual.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
I guess I got a couple of theories. One is that they knew I was self-prescribing and that I needed help. Maybe. I mean, that's to put a good side on it. But it could also be that I'm highly educated. I'd done my research and was very convincing. And, that's a slightly disturbing truth, if it is a truth. If it is that, then there's lots of people who, maybe can't sound as convincing. I did sound convincing.
But the way you describe it like that, it's as though you were trying to trick them into believing that you wanted to transition.
Well, I know now what was going on. At the time, I certainly didn't think I was tricking. I really was convinced the only way for me to live and be happy was to be Rachel. Right.
You then underwent a number of complex and painful operations abroad in Thailand, which you paid for privately.
Yeah.
Tell our audience about that.
Well, the first one is a pretty graphic one, and I haven't put this in print anywhere because it's obviously very personal, and it was painful too in lots of ways. I had what's known as an orchidectomy. which is the removal of testicles. In a way, I think it is important to say that because, you know, this was me genuinely feeling the only way to live was to go through with this. And it's about the most drastic thing in some ways that a guy can do. It's you know, it was shocking. At the time, I woke from the operation and the first word I shouted out was, yes. So I really did believe that this is what I needed to do to be me. And so I had my testicles removed. And that has caused me no end of trouble. I mean, I have no naturally occurring hormones now in my body. So it's a drastic thing to do, really drastic. I mean, actually, I've since had artificial ones put in, but, you know, I think apparently look convincing. But, you know, that doesn't replace the actual hormones. And for a man, there's no other form of hormone production in the body.
You also had in Thailand a very painful and over many hours facial reconstruction, effectively. Just describe that for us.
I did. I had a 9-hour operation, which was brutal, just because of the nature of the operation. So not just full facelift and neck lift and liposuction and such like, but actual reconstruction. So they ground down my forehead, so changed the shape of my forehead, gave me a nose job as well, and sort of made my face and skull actually slightly smaller as well. It was a gruesome, very tough operation, and I was in a pretty bad way afterwards for quite a long time. I still can't feel my skull in places, and I still have real problems with my sinuses and such like.
When you came back to Britain, in March 2017, you had a letter from the NHS. It was saying what?
That letter offered me full vaginoplasty, which is the construction of a vagina out of the penis. So that is the full works of trying to change your genitals into female genitals. And that landed on my doormat, and it was a very fast process. I was due to go to Nuffield Hospital in Brighton under the NHS for that consultation, 2 months with a view to having the operation in a couple of months' time.
Right. When you received that letter, what did it make you do?
It was the moment, I suppose, of absolute doubt. I was beginning, from 4 weeks earlier, I'd started to question.
Because you'd been to see
I went to see a psychotherapist, a gender psychotherapist, as it happens, and not really about that purpose, but she was extraordinary. She said to me, and it was one of those life jaw-dropping moments, she said to me, Rachel, I want to know what's going on underneath there. What pain are you carrying? And it was the first time in this whole process that had lasted, at this point, 3 years, first time anybody had stopped and said, what actually is going on underneath the surface here? You're carrying pain. And she was right.
But when you're on the path towards transitioning, which you can get off at any point, of course, you do receive counselling.
You do, but it's
on the NHS.
You do, but it's gender counselling, and it's only 3 appointments.
Meaning what?
Well, they are psychiatrists who see you, but they are gender consultants, and they, frankly, only really are focused on the gender issue. It's just one of the problems with the setup. They obviously do ask your backstory, so I did tell them about my traumatic past, but they didn't really address that. Well, they didn't address it at all. They were talking about and wanted to look at the gender issue. Do you genuinely have what they call gender dysphoria, the idea that you're living in the wrong body? And they said yes, and that's all they wanted to talk about and focus on.
And if they'd asked you that question, you would have said,
well,
yes?
I've had 2.5 years of really intensive post-traumatic stress counselling, so I probably wouldn't straight away have said. But I do think that any therapist worth his or her salt really should be sufficiently skilled to detect, as my therapist later did, look, there's something else going on here we need to explore. And I mean, this is one of the things I would say. I'm not against gender transition at all. If some people genuinely feel it's the only way to live and they do genuinely feel they're born in the wrong body, fantastic, go for it.
And you will have met
yes,
those people,
absolutely,
as
and let's give them all the support. But what I would say equally is that there are a huge number of people, I think, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, who do use, like me, gender transition as a form of escape. And this is what I came to realise. I was escaping my pain. I was disassociating from my own identity. And it's totally understandable. It's a flight reaction. It's a totally understandable reaction. I had gone through extreme trauma, multiple trauma, and I didn't realise it at the time. That's what PTSD does to you. It switches off the normal ways in which you can analyse things. And I didn't realise it. That is what I was doing. I was escaping my identity, living as somebody else, because I couldn't deal with the pain inside me. And it is really tough to deal with that pain.